From the age of 40, generally your health kind of declines. What I mean by that is that there's increased chances of chronic diseases or conditions that start to occur. Longevity is essentially living a lot longer and a healthier life in its basic definition. Rather than chasing longevity, we should focus on taking care of ourselves today and living today so that we can promise ourselves a better future if and when that occurs. When it comes to lifestyle, how heavy you are, whether you actually exercise, whether you consume a lot of alcohol or illicit drugs, and even if you're smoking or that you're having quite a lot of stress in your life, these are lifestyle factors that can eventually lead to you having a shorter lifespan and also having more health conditions. Now, with modern innovation, with technology, and the improvements that we've had over the last couple of decades, we can get people to live a lot longer. But the question is, what is their quality of life? Welcome back to Peak Performance Hacks, where we help you stay focused, energized, and on top of your game. And I'm your host, Dr. Gan. Today, I'm going to be tackling longevity because everyone seems to want to live till their 90s, 100, and beyond. And so I thought I will give my spiel on it, considering I've been a doctor for almost 20 years now. And really, this is my take on it. When we look at longevity, we have to break it down into what the definition is. And longevity is essentially living a lot longer and a healthier life in its basic definition. Now, when you look at the statistics, when it comes down to how long people live or their lifespan, the average age that most people live globally is about 73. Now, before you get startled, if you're getting close to that number, this is just a general average and it takes into account every cause of death. So it's not specific to only medical conditions. It's just a general global number when it looks in terms of both genders, including men and women. Now, when you look at the top 5 countries, you're looking at Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, Japan, and even Switzerland. And their average age or whereby they live in terms of the lifespan is about 85. Now, moving down the line, we've got Australia, which is about 83. And then as you go down to the United Kingdom and also the United States, they go down to 82 and eventually 79 respectively. Now, this is again just lifespan, and it just tells us how long people can live generally right now in this modern climate before they actually die. But it doesn't actually take into consideration how healthy they were when they die, which is, I think, a very important factor. Now, the other important factor you need to consider is that from the age of 40, generally your health kind of declines. And what I mean by that is that there's increased chances of chronic diseases or conditions that start to occur. And this can include anything from osteoarthritis to anxiety to hypertension and even skin cancers to even chronic pain. Now, when you add on the factor of getting even older, when you're going into your 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, you basically can add in things like cognitive decline and also mobility issues. Now, the purpose of this episode wasn't about doom and gloom and to say that as you get older, it kind of sucks. The reality is this is just part of what actually happens when you do get older. But not every 50, 60, 70, and 80-year-old are the same. Now, you can have some that are very healthy and then some that aren't. And when you look at blue zone regions, and essentially these are places in the world, and some of the areas include Greece, Italy, and even Japan, whereby you have people that are 80 and above and they're living really happy and healthy lives. Many of these people have been studied in order to work out what they're doing different that is allowing them to live such long lives and also really healthy lives as well. So, what are the main factors that influence longevity? And I've really boiled it down to 2 big factors. The first one being genetics. Now, everyone hates the idea of talking about genetics because it's almost like a cop out that if you have a certain condition or disease, fortunately, it is genetics. But there is quite a lot of truth to it because of the fact that genetics play a factor in whether you will express certain genes and develop certain conditions. Now, an example I like to use is Michael Jordan and LeBron James. genetically they have the body and also the ability and the talent to do the things they did on the basketball courts. And they sort of set themselves apart from other basketball players. So not everyone is built the same way. And similarly, you may know, or and I've seen many 90-year-olds who seem to be really healthy and quite mobile and even have their cognition. And you see some 70-year-olds that struggle with it. So there is a genetic makeup that leads to this happening, but there's also other factors that play a role. Now, there are biomarkers that you can look at when it comes to aging, and they're known as telomeres, and they're found in your DNA. But again, they're not guaranteed. And generally speaking, if you have longer telomeres, the chances are you're going to age well and you're going to have less health conditions. And the shorter they are, you're probably not going to age as well and you're going to have more medical conditions. But as I mentioned, it is not guaranteed. And they've also found in some individuals who have shorter telomeres that they actually age quite well and don't have a lot of health conditions. So using markers or biomarkers as a way to tell how you actually age is one way of looking at the longevity spectrum. Now, the other important factor when it comes to genetics is the fact that there's a lot of complex factors, and epigenetics is another thing that you need to think about. Now, the way I describe epigenetics is in its simplest form is that just because you have a gene, it does not mean that you're going to express the gene which leads to the outcome. So I'll give you a simple example. If you had a gene for a certain health condition or even for cancer, it does not necessarily mean that you're going to develop cancer. You need to have certain conditions met, whether it be environmental, that allows it to be conducive enough for it to occur. So there are some individuals that may have the genes to develop cancer or some other conditions, but they need to have certain factors happen. So for some, it could be a major event that is very stressful. It could be the loss of a loved one, it could be loss of a job, financial issues, or even going through a really hard time. And this could be the trigger that essentially causes the disease to then get expressed. Now, I'm not saying that that is the only way it happens. It can be other factors such as nutrition or even the lack of movement or exercise that can eventually lead to certain genes getting expressed, which leads us to the second factor, which influences longevity, and that is lifestyle. Now, I've mentioned it briefly with the epigenetic factors, but when it comes to lifestyle, how heavy you are, whether you actually exercise, whether you consume a lot of alcohol or illicit drugs, and even if you're smoking or that you're having quite a lot of stress in your life, these are lifestyle factors that can eventually lead to you having a shorter lifespan and also having more health conditions. So, where does this actually lead us in terms of longevity? If we know that these are the factors that affect longevity, where do we go from here? Now, I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Peter Diamandis, he's a doctor, he's an innovator, and really forward-thinking individual. And he was at a longevity conference with all the best experts and scientists in the arena. And so he got up on stage and he tried to rally the crowd by saying, put your hands up if you want to live till 100 or 120. And he was quite shocked by the fact that not many people actually put their hands up. And I think the biggest challenge for most people, and which is why I explained lifespan, is that most people like the idea of living to 100 or 120. But I think in a lot of those delegates' minds, the biggest fear is if you live till 120, will you still have your cognition, the ability to think, the ability to remember? Will you be able to move? And will you actually be happy and healthy at that age group? In my opinion, if you lived to 80, 90, and you had poor health, that is not my marker of having a great quality of life. And I don't actually want to live that long if my quality of life isn't going to be good. Now, with modern innovation, with technology, and the improvements that we've had over the last couple of decades, we can get people to live a lot longer. But the question is, what is their quality of life? Now, my take on it is that you can do multiple investigations. You can do genetic blood tests and even genetic testing to find out whether you would have or be in a position to actually have certain diseases. And I think that's great that we have that, but not all of them is guaranteed. And the fact that just because you have the gene doesn't mean that you're going to express it, also means that it does not necessarily mean that you're going to have that condition. And so for me, the basics is where I always go back to or revert to. And everyone here has probably heard me preach about this in my previous episodes, whereby by just doing the hard work right now, you can almost guarantee yourself a better future, especially when it comes to your health. So, what are the basics? Essentially, sleeping well, eating well, moving or exercising well, managing your stress, and even having a good social connection and having people around you that make you happy and keep you in a place where you feel good about yourself. Now, the way I see it is that no one actually knows how long we're going to live. And in my lifetime, unfortunately, in my career, I've seen a lot of young people that I didn't think would die actually die. And I've seen a lot of older people, which I thought may die, actually live and bounce back. So nothing is guaranteed when it comes to your lifespan and how long we're going to live. Now, when it comes to longevity, I also feel that by doing the basics that I've mentioned, it's almost like insurance, so that if you were to live that long, at least you know that as you get into your 80s and 90s, you are going to have a better life. Now, my take on it is that rather than chasing longevity, we should focus on taking care of ourselves today and living today so that we can promise ourselves a better future if and when that occurs. This wraps up this episode of Peak Performance Hacks. All the links and resources are in the video description or in the resource section, whether it is on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review so that more people can discover our podcast and it could benefit them as well. Until I catch you next time, speak soon.